Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Caticus. Today, I want to do a video about the differences between the Onexplayer and the Valve Steam Deck, because I find a lot of videos that talk about the Valve Steam Deck, they highlight the fact that products have existed before the Steam Deck, and they kind of gloss over some of the main differences. I believe that something, for example, I have the Onexplayer here. They gloss over some of the main differences between the Valve Steam Deck and something like this Onexplayer right here. Now, I can't speak for like the Aya Neo, which is another manufacturer and model and whatnot of a desk or like a handheld PC, gaming PC. But I can speak for the differences of this one here that I got, which is the Ryzen 5700U processor, Ryzen 7 5700U processor. And I had to do a lot of research looking through various web pages, including Wikipedia and PC World, and what is this? I don't even know what this is. This is techboilers.com, Tech Power Up, PC Mag, AMD itself, the Onexplayer, which offered very little information. And yeah, through all various sites, some of the tabs which I've already closed, and a lot of research into the different processors or the different graphics technology in these integrated chips, I have amalgamated what I think is the most comprehensive comparison and should answer the question of whether this is a Steam Deck competitor or if it truly isn't because of the price. And I think you'll be surprised at the answer, considering, again, so little information is given about the Steam Deck competitors. The only main thing coming up all the time is price. For reference, the Steam Deck's highest price is like $650, whereas this one here is anywhere from $1,300 to $1,500, depending on where you get it from. Just based on price alone, you're thinking, geez, that's like double the price of a Steam Deck. Of course the Steam Deck is better. But again, you might be surprised. I've run various benchmarks on here. I'm even in the process of downloading 3D Mark to run that as well to get some further benchmark numbers. But what I've found should give a better argument or a better explanation as to why something like this might actually be a valid option to the or valid I don't know, competitor to the Steam Deck, because I mean, if money's no object and you just want the best handheld PC that money can buy, honestly, the Steam Deck is not it, and for various reasons. Again, I will put all that stuff up in the second part of this video. I'll start showing benchmark numbers and more detailed information on the differences between the CPU, like which Ryzen the Steam Deck is using. They say it's a custom AMD processor, but really it is comparable to an actual Ryzen 3000 series CPU. And there are some areas where the Steam Deck beats this one and some areas where it doesn't, but overall, again, you'd be surprised. Anyway, let's get on to the second part of the video where I start showing you some benchmark numbers and we talk about the differences. See you in a second. Alright, so excuse my using my camera and not screenshots and whatnot for this, but I'm not that organized. Anyhow, we're going to look at the Steam Deck's multi-core, or like single core and multi-core processing scores, or Geekbench scores. For Geekbench on the Valve Steam Deck, we have a single core performance of 830. We have a multi-core performance or score of 3,666. Mark of the beast, make of it what you will. No, I'm just kidding. But then we look at the details here. It says the operating system Windows 10 and 64-bit. Mine's using my Onexplayer is using Windows 11, so I'm not sure if that makes much of a difference. The model is Valve Jupiter, motherboard is Valve Jupiter, power plant says balanced, but it's obviously run at high power. Mine does the same thing where it's in best performance, but it says balanced in the results. It says name AMD Custom 0405, but we'll look at how it actually compares in performance to a Ryzen 7 3700U, I believe, is what it best compares to. Topology, 1 processor, 4 cores, 8 threads. Okay. Base frequency, 2.8 gigahertz. Maximum frequency of 3,499 megahertz. You've got L1, L2, and L3 cache of 32 times 4, 32 times 4, 512 times 4, and 4 megabytes times 1, okay, for the L3. Memory, you've got 14.85 gigabytes. So that means all of the memory, or like the VRAM, for example, will be shared with the system RAM, and the graphics can pull more RAM from the system if the system isn't using all that RAM, so it is shared memory. But anyway, it says it's 14.85 gigabytes. I believe that's because it's calculating. A lot of times when you buy like a 2 terabyte hard drive, when it's reported it's actually less than 2 terabytes, for example. So it is 16 gigabytes, but it's calculating differently. Anyway, let's compare that to the Onexplayer with the same result. We're looking at a single core performance of 1157. So that is compared to the 830 single score of the Steam Deck. Then you've got multi-core performance of 6,552, so it's almost double. Almost. And I think that's partly to do with the fact that it runs at a higher frequency, not double, but it's running at a max speed or a boost speed of 4.333 gigahertz, as opposed to Valve's max speed of just under 3 like literally 1 megahertz or 1 hertz slower than the than 3.5 gigahertz. So it's 4.3 to 3.5 at full speed. This one's code name is Lucian. The what is it? The CPU architecture is codename Lucian. And I believe that the one inside of the Steam Deck is codenamed Mariette or something like that. Let me just make sure here. Let's go to here. And we look up here at this page and it says, oh, Matisse. Okay, sorry, it keeps focusing on my finger. Ryzen 3000, codename Matisse. Okay, then you got the next one up from that. 4000 is codename Renoir, and Ryzen 5000 is codenamed Lucian. Now, I was rather confused for a long time because the Steam Deck is like constantly talked about on tech sites as Zen 2 RDNA, Zen 2 RDNA, and something like, for example, the Onexplayer is just much more bluntly named the Ryzen 7 5700U. Okay, so AMD Ryzen 5700U. This doesn't even say the Ryzen 7, but if you go to the AMD site, which is right here, then it says Ryzen 7 5700U. So the information isn't all put together in one source. So this will be the first video apparently where it puts it all together into one source. But this is renamed Ryzen 7 5700U, and I haven't found anywhere that calls it the Zen 2 5700U, or you know, I guess the marketing campaign for the Onexplayer isn't as good as the one for Steam, because it makes it seem like Zen 2 is something Steam has over its competitors, and actually it doesn't, because these are also Zen 2 processors. Yeah. So I wanted to talk real quick about the cache right here. Cache is kind of a big deal. The bigger the cache is, the more it is, or the more the CPU is able to quickly grab system level information, stuff that's constantly used, instead of having to reload it all the time. If you look at the Steam Deck's cache, it literally has half the amount of cache. So I think that makes a pretty big difference in performance, and that probably speaks to why there's such a huge disparity in performance between the 5700U version, AMD version of the Onexplayer versus the Valve Steam Deck. But it's also worth noting that when we look in here, we've got one processor, 8 cores, 16 threads, versus the Steam Deck with one processor, 4 cores, and 8 threads. So it's literally half the amount of cores and threads. And that will also make a pretty significant difference. The difference in the amount of cache and the amount of cores is going to affect different games differently as well, depending on how effective any game is at multi-core processing. Some of them that aren't as big on multi-core processing, they might use just 2 or 4 cores. Generally, a lot of smaller games will use 2 cores. And in this case, you're not going to see such a huge difference in performance. The biggest difference that you're going to see, in my opinion, I'm not well educated on this, but I think the biggest difference you would see is clock speed. Now, let's go on to the graphical difference, and I'm going to bring up some more benchmarks. Unfortunately, I can't find many GPU benchmarks for the Steam Deck online yet. I'm not sure why people haven't run them. That'd be one of the first things I would do if I owned a Steam Deck. But hey, they'll come eventually. But let's see what I can find and let's see what I can bring up, okay? Okay, so I wanted to give you a little, I don't know, visual confirmation as to why I am not able to find results for Steam Deck's benchmarks. There are specifically 2 Geekbench benchmarks that test out the graphical score of PCs. One is for OpenCL. I believe that's the more common framework or protocol used for graphics rendering. And the other one is Vulkan. And everybody knows about Vulkan because it's largely talked about as the next big thing in graphics framework. But when I search, for example, Steam Deck OpenCL benchmark Reddit, and I've searched without Reddit, and I've searched for Geekbench GPU benchmark, I've done plenty of searches, and I just get tons of results that are completely unrelated to the Steam Deck. So apparently people aren't benchmarking their Steam Decks, or they're just not sharing them, or maybe they're just too busy playing them. But again, show you the Onexplayer's benchmarks. So the first one is the OpenCL score that's run through Geekbench, and it's got a score of 15,965. In a moment, well, actually, I'm just gonna pause this and run the same test on my main PC with a 3070 graphics card. Give me a sec. Okay, so here's my desktop PC, and as you can see, it's significantly higher. That would have to do with it being, a full-on graphics card, not an integrated chip. And call it what you will when they say, oh, RDNA graphics, blah, blah, blah. It's still integrated graphics. It's better than integrated graphics have ever been, but it's still integrated graphics. So you're looking at the difference. But we are talking about a handheld of 15,000 something, 15,965 versus the desktop of 136410. So it's almost 10 times as high. But it's just to give you some perspective. Doesn't mean that games are going to run like 10 times more poorly or anything. The benchmark scores don't always translate to better performance in game. It's not a one-to-one comparison. 10 times better benchmark results don't mean 10 times better gaming experience or gaming performance. Anyway, let's move on to the next test, which is Vulkan. Here is the Vulkan score, so it has a higher score. It's 18,805. I'm sure you can read it yourself. I forgot to go through some of the details of the comparison here, or like what kind of tests were run here. So I don't actually know what all of these mean, but for anybody who does, now you can see what the scores are and how they translate. And it's thankfully not so complex here. Let me go to the Vulkan scores, and it looks like they're running the same tests and getting higher numbers in Vulkan. So Vulkan is running better than OpenCL. About 10 to 15% difference in benchmark performance. So take that how you will. Lastly, we're going to look at some specs, like hardware specs, differences between the two units. So give me a second, I'll get all that lined up. Alright, for this part, you'll have to excuse me for jumping around between a few pages. I've got the Steam Deck's stats right here, or specs right here. I've got the Onexplayer's specs on two different pages because, unfortunately, the Onexplayer main website does a very terrible job of marketing the device, namely because it doesn't really highlight the benefits or the strengths of the machine very well, and I'll explain that to you in just a second. But one of the main differences you're going to see is that the screen on the Onexplayer is obviously larger, but this also makes it a larger device. This is not going to stick, it's not going to fit in anything but the absolute largest of pockets. We're talking cargo pants from the 1990s pockets. Aside from that, this thing is huge, and thankfully it comes with a case. If it didn't, it'd be a bit of a pain. You could manage it, but it'd be a bit of a pain. It is larger than the Steam Deck, but I believe it is also thinner than the Steam Deck. The Steam Deck, we're talking about the size of the screen here. So it has an 8.4-inch diagonal screen. You can see that right here. And it's a resolution of 2560 by 1600, which is great for like desktop and whatnot. It's great for clarity and movies and things like that. I wouldn't say it makes as much of a difference in gaming, especially for AAA gaming, because considering the mobile nature of these processors, most games you won't want to run at 2560 by 1600. Your performance will be pretty terrible. Some of them, like for example, I was running Mass Effect Legendary Edition, the new one with all three of them. I was running it at 2560 by 1600, and it ran just fine. But Cyberpunk, don't even think about it. It still chugs at 1080p with medium and low settings, and it works flawlessly at 800p. But you know, you've got a nicer screen on there. This thing comes with a base model of 1 terabyte. I believe you can also get a 2 terabyte. Here on the site, it only says M.2 2280 PCIe SSD. However, what it doesn't say is that, like something that highlights one of the biggest differences between these things here is that it is a Gen 4 NVMe drive or M.2 drive. Gen 4 is times 8, so it's 8 times bandwidth instead of the Steam Deck. If we look at this right here, it is a, where are we here? Storage. The PCI or the NVMe is Gen 3, so it's 4 times bandwidth instead of 8. So basically you've got twice the bandwidth for the storage on the Onexplayer as you do on the Steam Deck, which, I mean, your mileage may vary, but it should translate to games loading up to 2 times faster on the Onexplayer. Let's see, what other differences do we have here? Another key difference that we're going to see is the connectivity, if I can see where it's listed. Right here it says 2.5 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi. I'm not sure which page I read it on. Was it this one right here that had the... let's see here. Connectivity, oh, it says the same thing, but it's actually Wi-Fi AC, which is 5th generation Wi-Fi. Whereas the Onexplayer has Wi-Fi 6, that's AX, and it has a lot better multi-device handling, meaning it doesn't, it's better at dealing with more devices on the same network, and I guess reserving its place in the bandwidth and whatnot. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I do know that it also means less latency, input latency. So specifically for online games, if you're playing against others, you want to have as low input latency as possible, and Wi-Fi 6 means that. So these are some of the strengths that the Onexplayer has over the Valve Steam Deck. I apologize for suddenly the E and and whatever. I think I'm a little tired. I've actually been doing research and putting this video together for about 4 hours now. I would intended to just do a quick thing, but then I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know the answer to that. And goodness gracious. all these web pages open at the top are only a small percentage of the ones that I went through to find, like, to try to organize this information in a way that makes sense in a comparison fashion. Here it says the battery amount on the Steam Deck is 40 watt hours, but it doesn't say how many milliamps it is, whereas the Onexplayer is a 15.3, like 15,300 milliamp high capacity battery, but it's 15,300 milliamps, and I don't know what that translates to watt hours. Milliamp hours, I don't know, 15, I have no idea. It does come with a 65 watt charger, which is great for such a large battery. Imagine a phone with 5,000 milliamp battery and basically a 20 watt charger. However long that takes, it's going to take the same amount of time for this 3 times larger battery and a 3 times faster charger. So it is quite quick. Under 2 hours, I guess, maybe an hour. Yeah, I don't know what the charging rate for the Steam Deck is, because there's no information on how fast it charges, or at least none that I have found. I suppose with some digging one could find out what the charging brick is on the Steam Deck and figure out exactly how fast it charges. But yeah, you've got that information. The last thing we're going to look at is the actual outer hardware differences. So I'm going to pause this video real quick and I'm going to focus on the Onexplayer and find a 3D movable render of the Steam Deck so that we can look at some of the differences. It's mostly just an I/O difference, input output, and then buttons and whatnot that make the biggest difference. Let's do that right now. Okay, so I can't find a rotatable 3D model of the Steam Deck, but I can at least find 2 pictures to look at that show, well, this one here shows front and back to show the key differences here on the outside. So we've got a very similar button, like input button configuration on the front, 2 analog joysticks and the XABY baby. And then you've got a couple differences here. You don't have a Steam button on the Onexplayer. You've got a Steam button right here, and here you've got the probably options button. Then you've got the 2 pads right there for moving mouse cursors around or whatnot. Playing FPS games like a mouse and keyboard, I'm not sure. Since I haven't used a Steam Deck, I'm not really sure how it would feel to actually use both of these at the same time. But you have those on here, and you don't have that on here, obviously. Here for mouse input, if you want to use the mouse, you hold the keyboard button, and then you use the analog stick to move the cursor around. Is it the left stick? Yeah, there it is. So I can move the cursor around with the analog stick. It's not terrible. It's not the best. It's alright. Of course, it's a touch screen, so you can use your finger as the mouse if you want to. I find the D-pad on here really good. Can't say how it compares to that. I find the placement of the D-pad on here a little strange, but I think also usability of both devices will vary greatly depending on personal preference, and also I think hand size might make a difference. I have rather long fingers, piano hands, and I find it is no problem at all to use this thing with its button layout. That said, I've seen, for example, my kids or even smaller children try to use this thing, and at first they're like holding it down here and they can hardly reach the buttons. It's foreign to them. You have to hold it more up here and everything's a lot more manageable. It took a little bit for them to get used to. It wasn't as easy as just picking up an Xbox controller and going. So I think that might be something for people with smaller hands to consider. Whereas I'm not sure what the status of how this thing feels to use is. I would say that there are probably tons of videos that go over the hand feeling. Looking at the back of both devices, then we see some significant differences. And that is that while they both have the analog triggers and then the click clicky buttons up here. The Steam Deck has these two back paddles. I think those are awesome. I wish that they were on here, but they're not. So if we turn this thing around right here, we see that on the back there are two little buttons right there and one little button right there behind the wire. And excuse all the stickers. I had fun with the Asus stickers that came with my latest motherboard that I bought. Anyway, so you see the two little buttons right here are just volume up, volume down. I'm not sure if I can configure them to do something else, but that's what they are right now. And that button right there is a mute. And I actually find it really convenient having those. I find myself using them for volume or muting in games a lot more than I thought I would. I mean, at first I was like, volume buttons, but eventually I was like, volume buttons. So yeah, I can't say I'm displeased with that. The triggers on here are really nice, and there are actually videos or pictures that show how complex the mechanism in there, but also extremely solidly built. I've seen multiple reviews for the Onexplayer. I mean, I've only had mine for a month, and apparently according to the reviews, since it came out in late 2021, have all praised it or given it high marks for build quality. So it feels like everything in here is made very well. I think we have yet to see what the build quality on the Steam Deck will be. I'm sure there are lots of first impressions on the internet already of people talking about how great the build quality is, and I feel like Valve makes some really nice stuff. That said, I would be remiss not to mention that I do have a Valve Index, which I've owned for a bit more than a year, and that base station that came with it, let's just zoom in on the little bastard. That base station that came with it died after about a year of use, and of course it doesn't move, it just sits up there. So it just gives me a red light and says on the Steam application, it says that there's some sort of failure, device failure, and I need to send it in for repairs. Of course, it's more complicated for me because I live in China and I had to have it immediately after it came out, and so I ordered it from somebody who went to America and brought it back in their suitcase. And going through the return process, the receipt and all that stuff, I don't know. I don't even know if I have the receipt or if I ever had it, but it just means that I just have to buy a new base station for like $120, and that's unfortunate. The Index itself is great, and I haven't had any issues with it, but it's very unfortunate that the base station just died for no reason. I mean, it doesn't even seem to be dead, but it's a red blinking light, and that's a hardware failure of some sort. So yeah, that's my experience with Steam hardware. Now, that said, I might be just extremely unlucky and one of the very few people who has an issue. But again, I would be remiss not to mention that my own experiences with Valve hardware have been a little less than perfect. Great stuff, but I mean, I don't know. But does that mean you should go ahead and buy one of these and not one of those, or vice versa? Honestly, one could say that the price of the Steam Deck, this is something that the main websites keep talking about, is the price of the Steam Deck, and then, oh, look at all those Chinese ones, they're so expensive and the Steam Deck's gonna blow them out of the water. And it seems like they just all forget the fact that a lot of these Chinese ones that cost twice the price of the best or the highest tier of Steam Deck are really packing some serious innards. We're talking twice the processing power of the Steam Deck, and in the case of the Onexplayer AMD version that I got, the 5700U version, the screen resolution is so much higher, double the screen resolution, and 1.4 inches larger diagonally, which actually is quite a significant size difference. There are significant differences between the Steam Deck and the Onexplayer, for example, and even the Aya Neo and whatnot, there are significant differences. Now, another thing that I have considered myself and heard others say is that Steam can sell the device cheaper because they'll make their money back in games. And at first I thought that, but now that I think about it, I don't think that Steam or Valve is taking a loss on the Steam Deck. I think they're probably near cost, but considering the much weaker components inside, I say weaker, idly, or not like seriously in the sense of like, oh, it's weaker, but less cores and less gigahertz and like lower, it's a 3000, not a 5000 series. These differences do add up to mean that the internals of the Steam Deck are actually not very expensive. I think the greatest cost for Valve has been in the R&D and development, or research and development phase of it. They probably spent tons of money developing this thing. There's also internals in here that are beyond just specs. For example, there are touch-sensitive elements to the controller part of the Steam Deck to let you know when you're touching different buttons and whatnot. I don't know how in-depth it is. Does it know if you're touching the Y button versus pressing it? I don't know. I think that it knows when you're touching the joysticks, and that kind of sensor, or those kinds of sensors and whatnot in that device, which are not in this device, definitely add to the cost. But does it mean that this thing, is like, $1,000 to make and Valve is eating $350 to $500? I don't think so. I think that Valve is very likely selling this thing at cost, or even just a tiny bit below, but not a significant cut. Because, again, the internals of this thing are not amazing. They're good for, 800p or 720p gaming on low to mid settings for a lot of the AAA games, but, even Valve, according to the interviews that Newell gave, even Valve is considering making Steam Deck with beefier internals, largely because most people have been buying the high-end Steam Deck. There's far less low-end Steam Decks being sold than there are high-end. The demand for the high-end, or the most powerful version that they have, highest storage and whatnot, is much greater than the demand for the lowest one with the 64 gigabytes of eMMC storage. So I think that even Valve is considering that having a higher tier would be a good idea. And people call it Steam Deck 2. Valve is already considering Steam Deck 2. First of all, of course they are. They were considering Steam Deck 2 before they even finished Steam Deck 1, because that's what companies do. They look into the future. It makes sense that they consider, if this is the first step that we're working on, what's the step we're going to take after that, if it's successful. So of course they are. They have been for a while. It doesn't mean that they're just like developing it right now, or not like full steam ahead and forgetting this one. It just means that companies think ahead. But I don't think that we're going to see a Steam Deck 2 next year. I think we are going to see more powerful Steam Decks maybe as soon as next year, or the year after that, but they won't be called Steam Deck 2. They'll just be Steam Deck with higher specs. It'll still, in my opinion, but from my guess, it'll still be called the Steam Deck. It'll just be the 1 terabyte version with the AMD 4800U or 5700U or whatever next generation mobile CPU and GPU chip comes out from AMD. So that would make sense to me. Anyhow, in conclusion, I think if one has the money for something like this and they want a handheld that has the best possible performance that a handheld PC can have, I think that some of the Chinese offerings, and I can only say firsthand the Onexplayer in my case, some of these offerings truly are a good alternative to the Steam Deck. especially if you want something that is the most powerful that a handheld PC can be. It costs more. It costs double. But actually, the gains that you get when you increase the amount that you're paying in money get smaller and smaller. It's kind of like the difference between a CPU that is like, let's say 100% speed, and then a CPU that's 110% speed, or GPU, like you put one 3090 in your CPU and it's doing 100% processing power of the 3090, then you put a second one in there, an SLI, and it's only like an extra 15 to 20% performance gain, but it costs you twice as much. And that's kind of the way that it works in mobile PCs as well, handheld, when they shrink things down that much, is that the price is going to go up faster than the performance goes up. So it's going to cost double for less than twice as much performance, and it's going to cost triple for less than 15% more performance than the double. Like, if you understand my comparison, the price will go up far faster than the performance goes up. And I think that's what we're seeing in devices like this. So I hope that gives a little bit of perspective on, it's not just apples to apples comparison when you're talking about, oh, the Chinese ones are so expensive, and look at the Steam Deck, they're blowing them out of the water. Well, I mean, yeah, on first glance, when you hear a bunch of marketing speak and it tells you Steam Deck, amazing, no details, just amazing handheld that can play AAA games, and look at the other ones that were before, they were so much more expensive. But in actual fact, it's far more complicated than that. And well, although, for example, in this case here, you're paying a little more than double, this one is actually almost twice as performant as the Steam Deck, with a lot of specs that are better and some that are not as good. Like, for example, this one has LPDDR4X RAM, so it's running at 4266 or 4233 megahertz, whereas the Steam Deck has DDR5 RAM. I'm not sure what the megahertz is because I can't find it listed, but I mean, it's DDR5. It probably starts at 4800 megahertz, so you are getting a bit faster RAM here. There are many things that make this a better handheld gaming PC if performance is your thing. So the price isn't just that they can't charge less because they don't own Valve and Valve can make... It's not just that. There are significant hardware differences. The other thing that might make you choose something like this beyond just performance and specs is that you can buy these now. Good luck buying a Steam Deck at a good price. Scalpers are probably charging a ridiculous amount of money for the Steam Deck. I would imagine even the lowest tier, the 64 gigabyte version, is far more expensive. If you want to buy it now, you're going to have to buy it from scalpers, and it's far more expensive than the $399 that it's listed from Valve. Otherwise, you're going to be on a waiting list for months and months and months, whereas this one's available. So, yeah, you do have your... I think now with this video, if you've watched it, you have all of the variables and all of the information that you could possibly ever need in one place to explain why there's such a difference in price, and give you perspective on things, and, give you perspective on things. Anyway, I'm tired. I haven't had enough sleep. It's the middle of the day, but I stayed up almost all night. So I'm going to end this video here. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the section down below. I appreciate you giving a like to the video, and subscribe if you like this kind of content. And otherwise, this is Caticus, out.